Welcome back to another episode of A Big Heart. I am your host, Mike Patty. We are excited to be back with you. It has been over a year. Our last episode was uploaded on January 8th, 2022. Again, I'm embarrassed to say that, but we're happy to be back. Our goal is to start producing one podcast a month, see how that goes. I'll say at least one. If we can get more in, we will, but I don't want to overcommit. It's kind of what happened last time. I was trying to do them weekly and it was a bit unattainable with everything else going on. So we're going to have some great guests, hear some great stories. Again, we're really excited to get this up and going again. We had some really positive feedback and listeners from all over the world. So today's guests are Julieta and Patty Valdes. Julieta is a sudden cardiac arrest survivor, and Patty was there with her when the sudden cardiac arrest happened. So I'm really, really excited for you all to hear their inspiring and courageous story. All right, so we now welcome on two very special guests, two friends of mine, and I think we met a few years ago virtually here at HeartWatch Conference, Julieta and Patty Valdes. Thank you both so much for being here with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, so y'all have, from both sides, just a really, really inspiring and courageous story. So I'm excited. I'm not going to say much about it because I want you all to share that, but we're doing this at a really exciting time because y'all are both just graduating from your respective schools. So Patty, you're graduating from Texas, and Julieta, you're graduating from high school and going to Texas, which is really cool, following in your sister's footsteps.
I'm super excited.
Yeah, it's exciting time. So I want to jump right into it. So Julia, I'm going to start with you. So there's obviously going to be a bit of background kind of leading up to this. And I want to just talk about, obviously, life before your sudden cardiac arrest. And obviously, we're going to go into that. And it's so interesting because I was thinking, like, for myself, too, it's like you kind of think of it as like almost like the pandemic. It's like life before sudden cardiac arrest and life after. So if you could just take a couple minutes and just talk about, like, you growing up and kind of what your interests were, what your life was like, and obviously like health things as well that went along with that.
Yeah, so ever since I was little, even whenever I was in my mom's womb, I knew that I had some form of heart condition. They had already detected arrhythmia. So growing up, I knew that I had that, but I never really knew what it entailed or what it meant. All that I would really do was get yearly checkups. But other than that, I lived my life completely normal. And I was always an athlete, which was kind of like my main priority. That's what I took pride in, and that's how I spent probably most of my life and my years doing. So I played volleyball very competitively, and we would travel around the nation, and that was truly my passion. And I was hoping to pursue that on into college. So up until, I guess those 16 years of life, that was really kind of what I was focused on, and I lived pretty healthy other than that. So I never really kind of knew what my arrhythmia entailed until, of course, my cardiac arrest.
Mm-hmm. So you didn't have any real restrictions, which is interesting. And doctors were just kind of like monitoring it. So you were just kind of going in for like yearly checkups?
Yeah, so I would get a stress test, an EKG, an echo, and a Holter exam done every year during the summer just to make sure that everything was looking all right. And during my last stress test, my last being before my cardiac arrest, they had told me that something looked a little bit odd, but they never really gave it that priority of saying that I had to get checked out right away. So we kind of just left it there, which we shouldn't have. But after, of course, the pandemic hit and then my cardiac arrest happened. So I feel like it was never really ingrained into us how important it was. We just kind of didn't think anything of it because I had been fine all along. And my doctors gave me the clearance to play every year. So nobody really kind of knew the extent of how impactful and how big this could be.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay, so definitely want to get the background in, but I want to jump right to obviously a day that changed both of your lives forever. So May 3rd, 2020, again, starting with you, Julieta, kind of talk through that day. I don't know, is there anything like in the morning or anything throughout the day? I know the event happened pretty late in the evening, I think around like 10:30, but is there anything like earlier that day that like stuck out to you? Or if you could kind of take us through that day and obviously up until what was going on that night.
Yeah, so I actually don't remember much about that day and even like months prior because of my cardiac arrest, but I do remember kind of the time log of things. But as far as me remembering something odd or peculiar about the day, I couldn't really tell you. I think it was pretty normal as the pandemic could have been. So during
Hmm.
the pandemic, we were assigned workouts every day, both from my school volleyball team and my club volleyball team. So that day, earlier on in the morning, I ran 3 miles. I went on a 3 mile run, which I really enjoyed. And I did my school and my club volleyball workout. So I had a workout a total of 3 times that day. And then at 10:30 at night, when my sudden cardiac arrest happened, I was actually doing push-ups, kind of looking forward to my fourth workout with Patty, my
Hmm.
sister. So all I was really doing at that time was a little bit of schoolwork, but most of the time it was just prepping for volleyball because in my mind I thought that we were still going to go to junior nationals, which was in the beginning of June. So we didn't truly know the extent of the pandemic and how serious it was at the time. So
Hmm.
in my mind, I was still prepping and going for the biggest competition of the year. So I was kind of in that game mode.
Yeah. Okay. So you guys work out, and yeah, just talk us through what you know up until the point until when you collapsed.
What I've been told by Patty for the most
Mhm.
part is that I was heading off into my room and Patty had just finished off her schoolwork. And she asked me if I wanted to work out with her because Patty tended to work out late at night. And for whatever reason, thank God I said yes.
Mhm.
So I joined her in doing push-ups, and I was always just notoriously bad at push-ups. So it was already off to a rocky start. But the reason why I really wanted to do them was to get better at them since we would do them so often in volleyball. So Patty and I were doing push-ups facing each other, and I was starting to do them like actual push-ups, like not girl push-ups on my knees. But I was starting to get a little bit tired, and I eventually went on my knees and tried to do a couple more. And I voiced to Patty that I wasn't feeling too well, that I was a little bit tired. And she knew how bad I was at push-ups and how much I wanted to get better. So she was like, just shake it off, like just keep on going. And it wasn't long before I said, "Oh God." And I knelt up and hit my head on the wall next to me. And whenever I didn't have a reaction, that's when Patty knew that something was wrong.
Gotcha. Sorry. So Patty, now I'm going to let you kind of take over, and I think this is kind of I don't know. I know you said Julieta, it's a little the whole day is a little blurry for you, but obviously this is the point where Julieta definitely doesn't remember anything that was going
Yeah.
on. So Patty, if you could just kind of talk through that like initial what you saw and just kind of exactly kind of what happened.
Yeah, so like Julieta said, she had complained that they weren't feeling good. And I was just like, well, you're not going to get better if you don't do them. Just get on your knees and you can try to do them that way. So yeah, she collapsed and it was her hitting her head on the way down that like caught my attention because otherwise I would have thought she was joking or something. But she hit herself really hard on the way down and had no reaction. So that's when I called for my mom, especially because she started making weird noises, which now we know they were like diagonal respirations.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, to me, it looked like maybe a seizure or
Mm-hmm.
something. So I screamed for my mom. And when my mom came upstairs, that's when Julieta peed herself. And that's when we really realized like something was wrong. And my mom, to the best of her abilities, started performing CPR. She had never taken any like course or any actual like certification. She just did what she could.
Mm-hmm.
And I called 911. And after I went through like all the questions, the dispatcher asked me if Julieta was breathing. And I'm actually really thankful that while I genuinely thought that she was because of the respirations, I just remember hearing my mom like pleading Julieta to breathe. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that led me to say that she wasn't. And thankfully I said that because he led me to do CPR on her. So I did CPR for I think I don't know the time, a few minutes maybe. And eventually a cop came up and he took over the CPR while all the paramedics were getting all suited up because it was right during the pandemic. So they were doing all these other precautions. And my mom was like downstairs making sure they knew which house to go to. But the cop came straight up, like didn't have anything on, came, helped, started doing CPR, and eventually all the paramedics came. And that's when they took Julieta from the little hallway that she fell into to like the big area where we were working out. And that's when it's like also kind of a blur for me because it was like my mom and I just both kind of recollect things that the other one didn't. But from what we put together, they brought like a halo machine and that was doing CPR on her. And at one point, they drilled into her femur to try and give her adrenaline to kickstart her heart. And they gave her, I think, 4 AED shocks. Well, I guess it wasn't an AED. It was a defibrillator.
Defibrillator, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it took him about 23 minutes for them to get a pulse on her. So the whole time it was just, I think all the blood was collecting into her lungs. So when they were doing the compressions, the blood was going everywhere. So it was the paramedics were covered in blood. Julieta's mouth was dripping blood. And it was like the longest 23 minutes. Like 23 minutes is a long time, but it just felt like twice as long. And I think eventually they told us that they were able to get a weak pulse on her. And that's when they put her on the stretcher and took her to the hospital. But
Yeah. A couple things I just want to like emphasize, because I know you mentioned that your mom wasn't trained in CPR, but y'all did like a lot of things like really, really well that like I know in like CPR classes are taught. But a couple points that you said I just wanted to like emphasize. So I know a lot of times, like when we talk about sudden cardiac arrest, a lot of times people do mistake it for a seizure. So I think that's a really important thing to note, is that like when someone's having a seizure, it doesn't like last a whole long time. And when a seizure stops, the person usually just kind of like opens their eyes, is totally fine. And that's always how I try to differentiate it when I teach it. And then the agonal gasp, I think, is really important, right? To understand that means someone actually is not breathing. And when determining if we're going to do CPR or not, if I'm not going to do CPR on somebody that's collapsed, I would be 100% sure that they're breathing normally, which agonal gasp obviously are not. And then there's one other thing. Oh, just the pure like instinct of your mom to just go down outside and wave down an ambulance. I think that's like really important too, because obviously we want people doing stuff before EMS arrives, but right, we want EMS there as quickly as possible. So having someone downstairs waving down an ambulance is really important, or outside, depending on the situation. So obviously at that point, once you said they kind of got a pulse, they rushed Julieta to the hospital. Do you remember? I mean, I don't know if someone went to the hospital, but do you kind of remember those like feelings? What was going through your head? Did you have any idea what just happened? Did you think it, was a heart related thing at that time, or?
I do not know what I was thinking. Honestly, I think I do remember before they were able to get a pulse on her and like seeing all the blood and everything. Like her lips were purple, everything was purple. I remember thinking after what felt like forever of the paramedics trying to bring her back, thinking like, well, there's no way she's gonna make it, like just from what it looks like. But there's also like, you never think that's gonna happen, right? So like there was also a part of me that was like, well, there's no way she's not gonna make it. Like my whole life I saw her with me. So then there was like this battle the whole time. And I think that happened even while she was in the hospital of like, I just got very sure that like, as soon as I got a sliver of like hope that she was gonna be okay, I was like, I knew it, like there's no way she wasn't gonna be okay. But when that happened, I think everything happened so fast, and there were like, for us, there were no symptoms that anything was wrong beforehand, that there was like no way for us to prepare for that. So I think we were just more like confused. We had no idea what was going on. I don't think we were really thinking much, especially when they took her. I think they weren't gonna take me because it was right during the pandemic, so they could only have one person with her. And obviously that was gonna be my mom. So I think eventually they saw like I was very distraught, and the cop actually took me with him and I sat with him in the waiting area. But it was more of like having paramedics being like, okay, do you have a phone charger? Well, it's gonna be cold there, bring a jacket. So it was more of like get everything together to go rather than like what's actually happening, like what did we just witness type of thing.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, obviously, I'm a cardiac arrest survivor as well. So I've always said, Julieta, like we kind of have it like quote unquote easier, right? Because we don't get that, we don't have to sit there and watch, and right. And honestly, like I always said that, like it's so much harder on like the family to be like in that period of witnessing it. And I was in a situation where my brother was 13 and he witnessed mine, my dad witnessed mine. And the period of like when that happens to that point of like when the person's gonna be okay, like that's like unimaginable to me. And I didn't have to deal with it because, and we didn't have to deal with it because we don't remember what happened, and we just wake up in the hospital one day. But I guess I have one more thing, Patty, before I go back to Julieta. But do you remember at what point in the hospital where like your family and you like knew that things were going to be okay? Where I don't know if the doctors came in and changed the stat, as Julia says, from like critical to stable or something like that? Was there a point where like a doctor said to you like she's going to be okay?
No, I don't think there was a moment where they specifically said that.
Yeah.
I think the moment, so that night when she was translated to the hospital in Houston, when they put her on the ECMO, which is like the life support machine, they actually were like telling us all the different ways it could go wrong. But they were basically saying like she has a 0% chance of survival right now without us doing anything. And maybe there'll be a slight percentage of survival if she does get on it. But they were basically making sure, and my mom had to sign off like I'm aware of all these side effects. So like even when she was getting treatment, we had no clue because they had already warned us
Oh
that
my
it might
gosh.
not work out. And so she was in life support and the ECMO for about a week. And when she was starting to wear off of that and starting to come back, that's when we were like, okay, so she is alive now. How well is she?
Hmm.
So we didn't know. They were doing all these studies in her heart, and it was like every day they would come back with, oh, the center of her heart's not beating correctly. Well, just kidding. Now we were able to see that it is. Or like same with her brain, like we can't really tell how well her brain's functioning. So it was more of like once Julieta was able to kind of speak to us, because that took a while
Hmm.
too, because of the ventilator that
Hmm.
damaged her vocal cords, but it was us like questioning her without freaking her out about like how much she remembered. So we'd
Hmm.
be like, oh yeah, maybe you can come back and we can finish watching that TV show. But then
Hmm.
we didn't realize that she had that amnesia like for months, and she'd be like, what show? And then we
Hmm.
would be like, oh God. So then she
Yeah.
doesn't remember, like maybe there is something that went wrong. So I don't think there was a specific moment where they were like, oh, she's all good, she's gonna be back
Yeah.
to normal. It was more of like us feeling it out and eventually realizing that like, oh, she's okay. She's like
Yeah.
brain function's fine, everything's fine.
Yeah. Wow. Can't imagine. All right, so Julieta, do you know? Well, first of all, do you remember like the first like memory that you have of like in laying in a hospital bed?
Well, I would say it's kind of a little foggy just because I was in the medically induced coma for about a
Hmm.
week. And then I was weaned off of that for 2 days before I got my ICD placed. So
Hmm.
it was kind of some consecutive surgeries that followed. But I would say like the most vivid memory that I have, or like at least the first one in the ICU, is like having friends playing on like the overhead TV, and my mom was trying to like fix my GI tube. So I remember that pretty clearly for whatever reason, but I feel like I felt very much at ease having my mom there. So I couldn't imagine what it would have been like without having my mom there. So at least like from that memory, like even though I was in a hospital bed and I was freaked out and I didn't know what was going to happen, I knew that like my mom was by my side. So I kind of felt a little bit more calm and stable and that everything was going to be okay.
Yeah, moms have that effect on people.
Mm.
That's awesome. So, do you remember having like a conversation with the doctor about like the doctor kind of explaining to you what happened and like what the next steps were and just kind of like what your feelings were about everything like that they had told you?
Yeah, so I remember being out of the ICU and kind of the recovery area waiting to be discharged, and they did bring a doctor in to try to explain the rough idea of what happened. But I remember not being too distraught by it at the moment because I feel like I didn't fully grasp everything the way that they worded it to me. It wasn't until I was out of the hospital with my family that, I mean, the rough Google search really did it for me. And
Mm.
that's when all the emotions hit and I realized that wow, I didn't have a heartbeat for X amount of time and like all of this stuff happened and all the surgeries and my mom explained from everything that she watched and I got to see Patty also. I mean, the anguish of the people that were around me, my family members, I think after all of that information kind of came back to me, that's whenever I started feeling kind of that why me mentality. But yeah, I think I would say that during my hospital stay, I feel like my mind was everywhere but in
Hmm.
trying to figure out what was going on. It wasn't until afterwards that I saw kind of the impact that I had on me and my family, and then all kind of sunk in.
Yeah. Yeah, that actually I never thought about it like that because there was like so much going on in the hospital. There was like beeping and
Yeah.
meeting, like talking and doing, just trying to keep your mind occupied by like watching a show like Friends or, being with your mom and like you don't really have a time to like take it all in and like really feel like what just happened and until you like go home. And I think that's interesting too. So like what was the plan? I guess I know you talked in the beginning about volleyball. Did your doctor have a conversation with you about your future in volleyball, like in the hospital before you left, or did that come later?
I think that came later, but
Yeah.
in reality, I wish that would have been kind of one of the things in their forefront because
Yeah.
whenever I came back from the hospital, my main objective was volleyball, volleyball, volleyball. So
Yeah.
immediately before I was cleared and before anything really happened, I already started training. So I was running and I was doing all these things that I was definitely not cleared for. But I mean, I knew that I feel like deep down I knew that volleyball wasn't an option anymore, but I was very much in denial.
Hmm.
And I feel like my family was too. So I feel like that was kind of my outlet. So I would just continue training. And it
Hmm.
wasn't until a couple, I wouldn't say months, but until a couple of checkups later that we had a stress test done. And that's when volleyball kind of came up and we started discussing the possibilities. But it did take a while for that to kind of become a priority to them because there was also so many other things going on with me that were much more pressing, like my Lovenox levels, my all the clots that I had, my beta blockers weren't working. So there was so many other things that they were trying to take care of, but my mind was obviously somewhere else. So yeah,
Hmm.
it did take a while, but I definitely went against doctor's orders at the beginning
Yeah.
and kind of rebelled for a little
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah, that's not like an easy thing. And I think like a lot of young people like identify themselves with like the sport they play and they think like that's their like sole purpose in life. And like it's really hard to like understand that it's like not no matter what, right? We all have like other aspects to our lives that are really important. So obviously I know that was like devastating for you to like eventually make that decision. But like, what thoughts would you give to somebody now that you're, years later? Like, what thoughts would you give for somebody that's like going through it, right? They've had the conversation with their doctor. They can no longer do something they love. What advice would you tell them, or what would you tell them about like, or how would you tell them that like, hey, it's actually going to be okay?
Yeah, so I would say first and foremost to kind of give yourself grace. If you've
Hmm.
gone through something that's so like physically demanding, and I mean, of course, like for me it was my heart, but for other people it might be like an ACL tear or whatever it may be. Just to kind of give yourself some time to really regroup
Hmm.
and take it all in. I feel like relying a lot on family members and still trying to be involved in the sport in other ways is kind of what helped me. So now I kind of coach the little kids, which I find so rewarding, which I
That's
still get to
awesome.
be around the sport that I love, but not putting my health and my heart in jeopardy. So I think those were the two main things. And talking out with family, I also went to see a psychiatrist and
Hmm.
multiple therapists, and they kind of helped me navigate that rough path when I didn't know what to do on my own. And my family certainly didn't know what to do either because we were all dealing with a lot of different things. So I would say to kind of seek help whenever you need it, not to just kind of take it all in and bunch it all up because I did that for a while and it doesn't work. So there's just so many more avenues that you can explore, but it takes time. At first, it's very difficult, but you would be surprised at the amount of things that you can do with the free time that you don't have in sports. So there's so many beautiful things that come out of it. And it just, I mean, it's rocky, but it
Hmm.
you learn to live and you learn to grow and sports isn't forever. But yeah, there's so many
Yeah,
other aspects to live.
that's so true. Time is such a important like piece of this. Like it doesn't just like flip overnight and it's like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna move on and do something else. It's like it takes time to like accept it, but there are so many ways like to be involved too in sport other than playing and still to be able to fulfill like the competitive nature of being an athlete. So Patty, as a sibling, it's interesting. So again, my brother witnessed my sudden cardiac arrest and being typical like guys, we don't really talk about it too often, but or express like the feelings that came with it. But just like kind of curious about like witnessing what happened and then obviously now Juliet is doing great and but like that initial like fear of like could this happen again or like just kind of like I guess it's like PTSD that comes after like watching your sibling go through something like that. Is that something you have had to deal with or have to deal with still?
Yeah, definitely. I think at the time it was very much like PTSD through her, and it was mainly like making sure that like as soon as she came back from the hospital, especially my mom and I who were there during the event, She slept with my mom in her room
Mm-hmm.
for months and months, and my mom would not leave her out of her sight. And I slept in the couch right next to them.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was also like, as much as I was like, please, I don't want to witness this again, it was just like relieving that if anything was to happen, like we would be there, and we already went through it once, so we knew that like we could do it well enough to do it again. And I think that especially during the pandemic, I don't think it was like hard for us to like let go of being around her a lot, because she didn't have a choice but to be around us. So I think that made it easy for us to like move past that, because eventually like so much time had gone by and her medication was better, that like we weren't as worried about that as much. But I think outside of her, there was definitely like the more research we did about cardiac arrest and how prevalent it is, there was always that fear of like wherever I would go, like something like this might happen to someone else. And now, because I know what to do, it'll be on me to act. And as much as like, again, like I would love to be there and be the one that like knows how to do things and do so, I was also like, I do not want to have to do that ever again.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like that trauma of like, I don't want to be in big groups of people of like, and then something happened and then I have to be the one to do something. Or
Yeah.
like walking into rooms and making sure I knew exactly where the AED was in case there was an emergency. Like I wouldn't freak out as much, or just things like that. The moment somebody says like they haven't had their heart checked, or like they're feeling dizzy, or they're feeling anything, I'm always like, well, go get your heart checked. And I think I'm crazy, like I'm extrapolating my one experience, and I don't think anybody understands the actual extent of what cardiac arrest is and how many people it takes. And yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I feel like I know for me personally, and I'd imagine my family kind of felt this way too. There's almost like a safety net, like in the hospital, and like you all were in the hospital at a time where I guess being in a hospital wasn't the best place to be during the pandemic. But like for me, I know like when I was in the hospital, like I almost felt like safer. Like I struggled like going home because I was like, I love my parents, I love my brother, but they still didn't know CPR, right? Because it had been such a whirlwind. And I was like, what if something happens now? Because in the hospital, it's like I could just hit a button and the nurse would be like right by my side and be like, what do you need? And I could ask her whatever crazy question I had. But like can't have that at home. But that's interesting. All right, so last couple things, and I want to make sure we talk about the great work you all are doing. So, Julieta, so biggest physical and biggest mental obstacles that you've had to deal with since your sudden cardiac arrest?
I would say biggest physical was the kind of the loss of muscle tone and the ability to do things. So, for example, I struggled walking and going up the stairs when right before my last recollection of myself was this great athlete that was running and jumping and doing all these things. So, coming back home and being so weak was very, I guess, mentally draining. But another thing that kind of affected me a lot mentally was seeing the scars from my surgery. So, for example, I have a foot-long scar that runs vertically through my chest, and I have the bulge and the scar from my ICD on the left side of my chest. So, both of those things, kind of seeing myself and looking at myself in the mirror, it definitely took a while for me to adjust the way that clothes looked on me, and that, I mean, like it was something to be not necessarily like proud of, but like to that it was a new part of me now. Like I couldn't just get rid of them, and they weren't ugly. They're like, I guess, beautiful and all that stuff. So I think just coming to terms with how my body looked and the things that I was able to do now, and not trying to reminisce on how I looked or how I was then. I think those were kind of the biggest things that I had to overcome.
Yeah. Scars are like when they're fresh, they're like bright too. Like when you look at them, they're like bright red. You're like, oh my gosh, like this, like,
Yeah.
and then you realize like it's not gonna like they're gonna tone down a little bit. All right, so I kind of mentioned before, so we met at the virtual Parent Heart Watch, which was January of 2021. So somehow between May 3rd of 2020 and like January, I don't know, 15th of 2021, you all decided to start a nonprofit, which is incredible because amongst all of the recovery that you had going on, which we know is very important and takes a lot of time, you had the wherewithal and the forward thinking to like want to help other people. So, and you, either one of you can take this, but like at what point or what what made you decide to do this, or what point did you know you had to do something to try to help others?
I think fresh out of my cardiac arrest, we noticed, I mean, I didn't even know what a cardiac arrest was before this. And we noticed that a lot of our family, friends, and loved ones didn't know either. So we were getting a ton of questions about what had happened, why did this happen to a young person that was so healthy like me, and all those typical questions. So after just a simple Google search, we realized that it's so much bigger than what we thought. And with all those facts of it being the leading cause of death for student athletes and all that stuff, we stumbled across a ton of other organizations in memory of children, teenagers that their families had created. So we noticed that we kind of wanted to add our grain of salt to the movement. So I think it was just realizing that it was so much bigger than me and that it wasn't necessarily like a rare occurrence. It happens all the time. So I think that really prompted us to do something to try to help out in any way that we could, or at least like our community, and try to spread awareness in the Woodlands area.
Yeah. Okay. So you have this organization called Surviving SCA. Just talk about exactly kind of like what it is, what the mission is, what you do, and really anything you want to share about the organization.
Well, we started off at first just providing like regular information and sending people more information about cardiac arrest, CPR, AEDs. But it wasn't until later that we realized that we wanted to actually teach people CPR and AED awareness and teach the classes. We also started placing AEDs in different places around our area, our community. For example, my old volleyball club, we recently placed an AED there, and we recently started hosting heart screenings as well to try to prevent cardiac arrest in youth around our area. So those are kind of the three main things that we do. Of course, we're still very small, so we're just starting out and trying to grow it a little bit further. But yeah, I would say that kind of the awareness piece is our biggest factor, our biggest like leading motivator right now.
Yeah, it's so important. Like I think Patty, you were saying this before, like people still like don't know, which is it's crazy. I mean, I think, with the Mar Hamlin situation, it's definitely brought some more attention to it. But I still think there's like, we run across this at our screenings is people are afraid to know too, right? They don't want to get their heart checked because they don't want to have to stop playing volleyball, or they don't. Well, someone literally said that to us at a screening. Like we asked, "Hey, are you coming?" And he said, "No, I don't want to know because if something's wrong, then I can't play football anymore." And that's like not necessarily the case. And obviously, you and I are both in situations where we did have to stop playing. But now they release studies, and they just released like a Live HCM study where there's studies out there that say like people can still play competitive sports with heart disease. But knowing that you have it is just like so important because then it can be monitored and treated correctly. And I think people still don't know that. But with the work that you're doing and all those other groups are doing, hopefully more people will start to know. How can people reach out to you and get involved with your organization? Like website, social media, any contact information you want to give if people want to get involved?
Yeah, so all of our contact info is just Surviving SCA. So our Facebook, our Instagram is Surviving SCA, and our email, which I usually typically answer pretty quickly, is survivingsca@gmail.com. I think those are just the easiest and most accessible ways to get in contact with us. But even through our website, survivingsca.org, we have a little contact us section there, and we're just happy to have people reach out, and it just makes our day. So yeah.
Awesome. All right. So I have one more question for each of you. So I'm going to start, Patty, with you. And I was actually thinking about this one today. So you just watched Julieta graduate a couple days ago. So I just want you to talk about like, I don't know, those of you that are like big family moments, no matter what, but like how meaningful it is for you to be able to do that after what you all have gone through together.
Well, I told her, I was like, I'm not above crying at a graduation because I definitely cried.
Yeah.
And obviously, I feel like not that I wouldn't have before, but it's just like, I thought I wouldn't have before. Like, I feel like most people just expect that to be like the next stage, right? So, like it is memorable, but it's like, it's almost expected that the other person, like whoever it is gonna graduate from high school. And I think knowing that that wasn't almost the case for her, and it was her freshman year of high school when she almost died, and now she actually gets to walk the stage and graduate and continue on with her life. I think things like that are normally like memorable, but not, like that big of a deal for many people. For now, for us at least, it's like those are the things that we almost missed out on. So I think it was like a very, very nice moment to be there and like reflect, and almost like when her name got called, I was like nobody knows like that this is a huge deal, because she almost wasn't gonna be here. Like her name almost wasn't gonna get called. So it was really cool. It was
That's,
really nice.
that's
Yeah.
amazing. And Julieta, my question for you is, if you could give advice to somebody who's just recently had a sudden cardiac arrest, just recently been diagnosed with heart disease, just recently had an ICD implanted, if you could give them like one piece of advice, what would it be?
I would say to talk to someone.
Yeah.
So I think for me, at least, like visiting a psychiatrist that helped me navigate my feelings, those really big feelings that I was bottling up on my own, that helped me out a lot. And I think that made the recovery process, at least like mentally and coming to terms with everything that was going on, a lot smoother. And also just giving yourself grace. I feel like I lost a lot of patience in the moment, and I just wanted to keep going and keep moving, and everything was going so fast, when in reality I just needed to slow down and take a breather and just realize that it was all going to be okay. And yeah, so I feel like relying on loved ones around you, and of course a professional that can give you that third perspective, helped me a lot.
That's great. Well, thank you both. This was so great. I'm so happy to have been able to do this with you and restart my podcast with you all. I was thinking of who would be two great guests, and I thought of you. And I have to say, my mom actually brings up like you two a lot when we talk about Parent Heart Watch and how much she enjoyed meeting you and talking to you and hearing your stories. So she's always asking about you,
Mm.
both of you. And yeah, so thank you both. I'm so excited to, continue to watch the amazing work you do with surviving SCA. And I know it's going to have a great impact moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.